Hello again and welcome. This is Chris Fleming from the School of Humanities and Communication Arts at Western Sydney University, and this is the Week 10 wrap-up of Philosophy and the Good Life. This week, really what we did three things. We looked at the assessments, we looked at the topic of insults, and we looked at the topic of distraction. So I'll go through this roughly in that order. Now, I won't be able to go into all the things that we did in the seminar, especially to do with writing and the assessment, but if you'd like more details about that, then please listen to the podcast for Week 10. One of the first things I said was I offered sincere congratulations to people in the unit, because this unit, in fact, has the highest, for that assessment, has the highest assessment grade in all my years of teaching, regardless of where I was teaching. So that's really good news. You people are doing something right, or at least I think you are. And so that was a great pleasure actually to mark many of the assignments, most of the assignments, and I had a very low failure rate. So again, well done with that. What we did also in the seminar was I handed around three samples of high distinction student work, so that people could get some concrete sense of what students who are doing well or students who are writing well, what exactly it is that they're doing. Because writing can be thinking about writing is quite an abstract task, or we often think it is, and it helps sometimes to look at concrete examples of the kinds of things we might think of when doing our own writing. So that's the reason I handed that around. Hopefully you found that helpful. Those of you who were not at the seminars, you wouldn't have got one of those sheets, but you can contact me and come and get one. So there is, or email me and we'll figure out a way to get it to you. So the first topic that we looked at was the topic of insults. Now, this seems like a pretty unusual topic to be looking at in philosophy. You don't normally think of insults as part of philosophy. And by and large, that's true. The Western tradition in philosophy has not concerned itself terribly with these kind of things. But the ancient thinkers did, specifically those in the Hellenistic school and the Stoics and so on, thought about insults. And now, we didn't spend a lot of time in this, but really what I was trying to do in this, in this seminar, was to give some sense of that, again, we're dealing with quite real-world concerns. So looking at William Irvine's writing for this week from his book On Insults, he looked at a variety of things, ways of responding to insults. Now, we've got to pause for a moment, because insults are a very particular thing here. It's not simply the case where someone gets offended, right? People can get offended for any number of reasons, not simply being offended, not simply an insult. Another thing to consider is that that there is a kind of, you can trash talk people in a fun or friendly way. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about the idea of trying to cause offence through words, usually. Now, Irvine outlined a number of strategies for dealing with this. One was to capitulate. That is to simply break down and cry and say, "Why are you so mean to me?" Another was to refute on logical grounds. So if someone says you were stupid, you can say, "Well, listen, I've got an IQ of 135, which is well above the average." Is that going to work? Who knows? The next one was a counter insult, so where you offer a rebuff. Someone calls you stupid, and you say, "That's possibly the most intelligent thing I've ever heard you say." There's a variety of counter insults. There are, and I gave examples from Chesterton and from Winston Churchill, which are both from the book, or variations on those. Another is to pardon or to forgive, to simply say, "Look, I know that it's your preference to insult me, and that's not a problem, just given to wonder why you do it." There is another rhetorical strategy where you thank the insulter for insulting, and you in fact add other things to the insult. What Irvine ends up adopting is what he thinks of the pacifist response, which is no response at all, that you simply let the insult pass by you. Now, some of the questions I raise is whether this is in fact a good response, and what are the ethics of this? What are the ethics? Simply not about giving a personal response, an effective response, but what is it? What does it mean to respond to aggression? Under what circumstances should we or do we respond to aggression? And so I talked about, how many people honk at others and flip them the bird on the road and so on. But this is worth thinking about, not simply the context in which we respond to insults, but the very notion of insult itself and when we do it and how we respond to them. The next topic that we looked at was the topic of distraction. And the way I introduced that was talking about the idea that we should use this last part of the unit to start to really do some thinking and thinking about our experience. Now, I made it an issue of that. What does it mean to actually interpret our experience? Because this is a difficult thing to do. And I drew on some of the ideas from phenomenology and visual perception. And then we tried to deal in some depth with looking at the idea of what distraction is and what boredom is. What is it that's happening? So one of the things we came to was distraction is usually something that happens to you despite an intent for it not to happen. You are wanting to focus on something and you're getting dragged somewhere else. And so we tried to enrich these definitions so we got some sense of that would capture our experience of distraction. Boredom is the same thing. Again, we started to look into that, and one possible definition is that boredom is wanting to want something, being desireless, not wanting to do anything, or not knowing what to do, and wanting to want, or desiring to desire. Now, it doesn't work in every instance, but again, we're just showing you that one of the things that we should try to do here in the last part of the unit is run these ideas across our own lived experience. I mean, assess them for their rationality, assess them for their ethical value, and whether you think they're effective and what you think is the kind of life that you want to lead. But also evaluate these in relation to your own lived experience. One of the reasons we looked at for distraction was a sociological reason. So I looked at Georg Simmel's work, which comes from the very early 20th century and is pretty old, so it's strange to think of how apt it is. And one of the things that he says is that technology essentially urbanizes the world that we live in. It not only urbanizes cities, it makes cities as we understand it, but you can bring the city to you wherever you go. You can go into the country and take your mobile phone. And one of the things he says is that the feature of technology is you don't have to work very hard to be entertained or distracted, right? If you're sitting alone with a couple of wooden blocks or a piece of paper and a pen in the country, you're going to have to work. You might have to work a little bit hard to engage yourself in something, rather than if you have a variety of distractions. Now, the next question is, which ones of those are satisfying ultimately, and why they are, and we talked a bit around that as well. But we then looked at Louis C.K. Excerpt from him on YouTube, and we looked at a quote from David Foster Wallace about the idea that in some sense this distraction, this allowing us to be distracted, this desire for distraction even, is something that comes from a spiritual malaise in a way, that we're avoiding something. We can't handle being alone in a way. We can't handle the idea that people are out having a good time when we're not. We want to know what people are doing. We don't want to be confronted with our own thoughts, or these kinds of things. Now, whether that's coherent or not, well, certainly coherent. Whether it's true or not is another question. But it is certainly the case that distraction is both a technological and a personal, psychological, if you want to call it spiritual concern, and that. So what are we to do about it? Now, distraction is not always a bad thing, obviously. There are purposes for distraction. Daydreaming to come up with ideas is fantastic. Athletes use distraction deliberately to get their mind off the pain that they may be experiencing in an event. One of the authors that we looked at was Matthew Crawford, and he said recently in a book that one of the conceptions after the Enlightenment, after the 17th, 18th centuries in the West, is that we are obsessed with autonomy and freedom, and it's a very particular idea of freedom. Freedom in this conception means the ability to escape circumstances wherever you are. So one of the things is the mobile phone provides for this kind of opportunity. I'm walking down the road, I don't like it, I feel trapped, I feel imprisoned. Simply by walking down the road, I can escape into my phone. I'm sitting in a lecture, I don't like it, there's something going on that I'm not interested in, I can escape it. And so this particular idea of freedom as a kind of way out all the time, and we talked about the way that this plays out across a number of domains in life. And what is that really a particularly fruitful way of thinking about freedom? Are there forms of constraint in which can in fact be productive in a way? And I talked about blues, some other people talked about sport, and talked about games and the idea of freedom within limits. Now, if you weren't at the seminar, a lot of today's update, I think, might be coming past you too quickly if you haven't listened to the podcast. So really, this is just a summary, as you can probably start to work out. we finished up with the idea of that we came across in Damon Young, which is the other reading for week 10, which is the idea that distraction can be ameliorated, can be lessened if we're clear about the things that we value. If we know, in some sense, that we have a finite life, finite resources. Now, we are bedeviled and troubled by the idea that we're going to miss out, and that in some way that we can have everything. And there's this great pressure to have everything. I referred to a book by Adam Phillips called On Missing Out in Praise of the Unlived Life, which means that we have to accept at some point that making decisions cuts off other options for us. And maybe that's not such a bad thing if you want to pursue any of these things. You can look at some of the sources I included towards or at the end of the PowerPoints. Obviously, we traversed a lot of ground today, and the discussions were actually really, really interesting, so thanks for that. But if you wanted to kind of just get your head around the basic points, have a look at the readings by Damon Young and by William Irvine as a kind of orientation, and bring other things in as you see fit. In any case, that's enough from me. It's gone on a little bit longer this week, but so I'll leave it there, and I will see you, hopefully, in the seminar next week. Bye for now.